So I'm going to now be using these numbers to select my brushes. So I'm going to go to the damn standard brush now, and I'm just going to kind of sculpt. I'm sketching lines in the direction that I feel like the skin and the wrinkles will flow on this character. I'm not trying to sculpt any sort of final wrinkles just yet. I'm just sketching. And that's a really important kind of thing to get your head around, is that you don't have to create the final shapes right off the bat. You can just sketch ideas in here. So I'm literally sketching some ideas for the nose, switching over to the standard brush, building up those forms, going to the damn standard again and creating sort of an interesting variation of different types of nostrils here. I'm not sure what we're going to get for the nose here. I'm really kind of creating this as we talk about it. It's absolutely a sketch. I'm going to bring this bone structure back, and we were working on the ears, so we will return to those. Just want to create, there we go. I'm looking for something that feels a bit alien, a bit aggressive, so let's bring this forward. Bring this out a bit. There we go. So let's go back to these ears. I'm going to mask the ears out and invert the mask. Make sure that we mask the backside here. And I just want to refine the shapes of these ears. And I don't want them to be so big that they overpower the character from the front. I'm going to go to the inflate brush. I'm going to inflate the earlobe. I'm going to go to the standard brush. Actually, we'll go back to the move brush. And I just want to shape this bit of cartilage which forms the outside of the ear. Let's push this all in a bit. This is called the helix, the outermost ring of cartilage. And then inside the ear, you'll have this shape that you'll recognize. It looks like kind of a little Y. Comes around this way. Let's go back to clay tubes and build that up. You've got this shape here, which has a little divot right there. That's called the antihelix, that form right there. Smooth that back a bit. The conch of the ear is the dip, the hole that goes in, and then the hole that goes deep into the skull is called the auditory meatus. And here the helix usually comes down inside the ear. That's called the leg of the helix. So we want to get that sketched in. And then we want to pull this little divot out right here. This is typically that little bit of skin that you might press into your ear to plug your ears up. This is called the tragus. So let's execute Dynamesh again just to sort of refine that volume there. Just going to mask there and then invert that mask, and I just want to start playing around with the sides of the head here. There we go, that's interesting. And I want to bring that cheekbone kind of up to the ear. The ear tends to sit right behind the cheekbone. There we go, that's nice. It's an interesting shape. Now, let's take a look at another tool here. I want to adjust sort of the angles of the head here. I'm going to use something called the transpose tools. I'm going to mask the entire head. I'm going to invert that mask so the body is now masked and the head is unmasked. And I'm going to come up here to rotate. Now, it defaults to using the gizmo, which is our method of moving, rotating, and scaling objects inside of ZBrush. If I press this button, that turns off, and now I get this tool here, the transpose line. I'm going to show you how to use both of these. The transpose line is older, so what I'll do is I'll start with that. For the transpose line, usually you might end up with something like this, with all these dots, these circles stacked on top of each other. Every time you use transpose, immediately draw a new line. So you've got your 3 circles stretched out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate the head. I'm going to click here at the base of the skull, and I'm going to drag out and let go over the background. Now, because I'm on rotate mode, if I click inside this outer circle, I can now rotate around this circle. So what I'm trying to do is I just want to give that head a little downward inclination. I want to invert my mask again, and then I'm going to just rotate the body back. So it's sort of leaning forward a bit more. It's got a bit more of a forward inclination. It feels a little bit more aggressive. That's all that is. Clear my mask by control clicking and dragging on the background. Now I can do that using the gizmo as well. So I'm just going to save this. And now let's step back to before we did that rotation. There we go. And now we're going to do it using the gizmo here. If I unlock my rotation, my tool here, if I click unlock, I can click and drag and move this around. If I do not have this locked, I end up moving the whole, or if I do have it locked, I move the whole object. So let's go ahead and move this to the same location. We'll move the gizmo to the base of the head. We'll lock it again. Now I'm going to click and drag that circle. That outermost circle is rotating me around the z-axis. So I'll rotate that down. I'm going to control click on the background, and I'm going to rotate this back. Same exact outcome, two different tools. So your default, whenever you go into move, scale, and rotate in ZBrush, it's going to bring up this gizmo, so you can actually move, scale, and rotate using the traditional sort of tools that you're accustomed to. Maybe if you're using Maya or 3D Studio Max or Modo. If you press this button here, it turns off the Gizmo 3D and allows us to use transpose. Now transpose is still extremely important for things like posing your model, because it's a posing tool that allows us to rig and pose our characters. That's real important, and it's not something that you can do as easily using the gizmo. So it's important that we understand both of them. So I'm going to turn the gizmo back on and clear our mask. So I'm interested in stretching these cheekbones out a bit more, so I'm going to take my move brush and I'm going to stretch these out, because remember, I'm going to put some tusks in there in a little bit. I've got it in my head what I think this is going to look like, so I've got some ideas about it, so I just want to prepare for what's going to go there. And I also just want to give it a little bit more of sort of width and angularity and make it feel a little bit more intimidating. I want to bring this jaw out into something a little bit more pointed, almost devilish. Let's do that. And I'm going to go back to my clay tubes brush, and again I'm thinking about that maxilla, this sort of cylinder form of the skull that the lips wrap around. Again, back to that idea of basic forms. You always want to be thinking about your basic forms if you want things to feel natural and interesting. If you don't think about that form, if you don't think about the shapes of the skull underneath and how they realistically interact with each other, then it's not going to look good. You have to be thinking about those things to make it work. There we go. I'm really liking some of these angles that are happening here. I'm going to give some more attention to the neck here. I'm going to go back to my clay tubes brush, build up that sternomastoid muscle. Sternocleidomastoid. It comes from the mastoid process, which is a little bump at the base of the skull here behind the ear. It starts there. It originates there. And I'm using subtract now to scale it back a bit. It comes down here and then attaches to the sternum, which is right here, of course. The sternum is in the center of the rib cage. It attaches the sternum and the clavicles. It's got two little branches down there. So that's why that's called the sternocleidomastoid muscle, or usually more generally just the sternomastoid. Let's turn the Z intensity down and just work into that. Build up the muscles of those shoulders there. Here we go. And I just want to do a little bit of playing with these ridges along the head here. I'd like to create kind of an interesting crest along this creature's head. That's interesting. Give it a little bit of jagged, serrated kind of quality coming down the back of the head here. That's interesting. And I'm going to go in with my Dam Standard brush and just sort of look at creating some sort of divisions here in between each one of these sort of serrated sort of plates. Or this sort of almost like a subcutaneous growth, like the crests that gorillas get on top of the head. Those aren't really bone, those are just a subcutaneous protrusions. There we go. Just sketching and thinking. Go back to my move brush. Let's bring some out here. Let's start thinking about subtools now. I want to put some eyeballs in here, so I'm going to need some more spheres. I'm going to close the brush menu just by clicking the little radial icon. So here's our tool menu again. And open up Subtool, and this is our Subtool menu. Now subtools allow you to have multiple Z-tools with their own textures, their own polypaint, their own subdivision levels and sculpting, all grouped together. So an example of that, if we go into our light box, into our tool menu, if we open up the Demo Soldier, for example, which comes default with ZBrush, this is a character that has multiple subtools. It's got the body, the shirt, the tank top, the backpack. These are all individual subtools, individual Z-tools that all have their own subdivision levels and their own sculpting. And as I move between them, you'll see if I go to the geometry menu, for example, if I were to divide the backpack, so the backpack's got 3 subdivision levels. The hotkey for divide, by the way, is Control D. Shift D steps down, Control D steps up, or D steps up. Control D adds a subdivision level. It's just like pressing the divide button here. So if I've got 3 subdivision levels on the backpack, and then I switch over to the t-shirt here, I can switch my subtool by going to the list here and switching, or I can just alt-click on it here in the menu. So if I go to my tank top now, you'll see if I go to the geometry menu, this only has 2 subdivision levels. The backpack has 3. Go to the shirt, 2, backpack, 3. So each one of these is its own separate Z-tool. So what I want to do is I want to go back to our sculpture. Now the sculpture is still there, by the way. You can see it's right there. It's just we have a second Z-tool that's active right now. So if I click here, it just goes back to our sculpture that we've been working on. So I'm going to go ahead and add some spheres in here for eyes. So what I need to do is I need to go to the light box and double click Polysphere. That just loads a new polysphere into the tool menu here. So I can go back to our head, just select Polysphere, go to Subtool. Under the Subtool menu, I click Append. Now because I just loaded that polysphere, it's available right there in the Quick Pick menu. Remember, Quick Pick are the most recently things that you've selected. So because I loaded that polysphere, I can now click it and load it in as a subtool. So the polysphere is there. It's probably sitting inside of the head so we can't see it. As a matter of fact, if I turn on transparency here, you can see through it. It might be a little bit tricky to see on your screen. There you go. There's the sphere inside the head there. So I want to take that sphere out and scale it down and turn it into an eyeball. So we'll do that by selecting it as our active Z-tool, because right now the head is the active one. If I select the polysphere, now the polysphere is the active one because it's got the dark stripe along the bottom. I'm going to go to Move, and I'm going to move it off to the side here. I want to scale it down. I'm going to click the Scale button here, or the Scale portion of the gizmo to scale it down to be about the right size for the eyeball. And I'm going to move it into the eye socket. I'm going to turn off transparency so it's a bit easier to see as we place it. So I'm just going to place the sphere in here as an eyeball. There we go. Now, once I've got the eyeball placed, I want to mirror it over and create another one. There we go. So to do that, I go to Z Plugin, I go to Subtool Master, and I click Mirror. I'm going to merge into one subtool across the X axis. Click OK, and there we go. What it's done is it copied that sphere across to the other side, merged them together, so now our subtool has 2 eyeballs in it. So if I want to go back to sculpting on the head, I select the head, and that is now my my subtool that I'm sculpting on. And you'll notice the eyes get a little bit darker gray. If I switch to the eyes, the same happens to the head. They become brighter and the head becomes darker gray. That just allows me to see what is my active tool that I'm currently sculpting on. So I'm going to save my work. Again, I'm adding a new digit to the end of each file. There we go. I'm just going to take the move brush again and just adjust the silhouette. I'm constantly moving around the character as I'm sculpting, and I'm also trying to always be thinking about the silhouette. That is the character in profile or in without the shading visible. So for example, this is the silhouette. I'm trying to think of how the outermost boundaries of the character appear, because that's really in design the most important thing. So I find it really valuable as I'm working to just be looking at things and thinking about things in those terms. And sometimes I will even turn off my shading, so I'm working just in a flat shaded mode like this. Then when I want to return to my normal material, I come down to basic material 2 and select it again. So what I did there was I just went to the flat color material, which took away all the shading information, and then basic material 2, which is back to my normal material. And I haven't looked at this character from the underside recently, so we should really take a look at it from this view. And that's really revealing. I can really see how I could benefit from pulling the face out more and the cheekbones out and back. There we go. Just trying to really accentuate and give it a nice angular, creepy look. Going to my standard brush and just sort of going to pick out some highlights here, just picking out some high points. And this stage I'm going to start looking at changing my alphas. So my standard brush is just adding, just like this, or subtracting if I hold down the Alt key. And it's a real standard brush, hence the name, the standard brush. Now if I go to the alpha menu here, click the alpha palette, and I select alpha 01, the alpha is a grayscale image that will change the tip of this brush. So now I get kind of a finer brush, a finer tip. So I'll use this to go in here and pick out kind of the high points of some wrinkles, or maybe, subtract holding down the Alt key. It's just real useful for getting a finer, more refined stroke. I'm going to start stroking along the direction of where the flesh would sort of wrinkle around the mouth area here. We haven't done anything with the mouth yet, but we will. I'm going to use the Alt key, press the Alt key just to pick out some shadow here. Here we go. And I want to sculpt some eyelids here. Now I actually want these eyes to sort of bulge out in a real creepy kind of way. So I'm not going to cover them with eyelids, but I do want there to be some sort of socket and eyelids in which these spheres are sitting. So I'm going to turn on transparency. That allows me to see through the subtools to my mesh that I'm sculpting on. I'm going to take my clay tubes brush and I'm going to just start building up all those faces underneath that sphere so they're sitting on the outside of it like this. There we go. Now we'll turn off transparency and you can see that we've now got those faces sitting outside the sphere. I'm going to mask out sort of the shape of an open eye here, like this. I'm going to invert that mask, and I'm going to take the move brush. Now you remember how I said if you hold down the Alt key it makes things subtract? Well, you can't really subtract with a move brush. How do you subtract movement? You can't really do that. So if you press the Alt key with the move brush, it pushes and pulls those faces straight along the normal of where you click. So I can hold down Alt, click and drag, and it just sort of pushes those faces back. So I'm actually going to make this a little bit smaller. So I'm going to mask up here. There we go. And let's push those in. Now you see that it reveals the eyeball underneath. I'm going to use the move brush to shift the shape here of the medial canthus of the eye. That's the tear duct, the little bit that dips off the eye on the inside corner. Let's adjust these shapes here. Pull this back, and now I'm going to control, click, and drag, and that's going to execute Dynamesh, and it's going to rebuild the mesh around the eye here. So watch what happens. There we go. You see it just rebuilds that whole area. I'm going to smooth that a bit, And I just want to pull these back. So I want to be able to see the eye more clearly. And it's hard to get into this area because of the brow ridge and the cheekbone. So I'm going to show you how to use a tool called the selection marquee. So right here, it's a brush. By default, you've got the rectangle selected. So watch what happens. No matter if I'm just on a normal brush, sitting here sculpting, if I press Control Shift and then click and drag, it gives me this green marquee. So I draw a marquee. If I press the space bar, I can move it around and then let go, and anything inside that marquee is visible. Everything outside is then hidden. If I want to invert that visibility, I Control Shift, click and drag on the background, and that inverts it. Control Shift click on the background makes everything visible again. So I'm just going to draw a little marquee there that isolates the eye. So I can kind of zoom in here a bit more. It's a little easier to kind of zoom in and see what I'm doing now. Take the clay tubes brush, and I'm just going to continue working into these eyelids. I just want to give it sort of an interesting fleshy kind of eyelid in here. I want it to feel real realistic, like that sphere is actually suspended in tissue and inside the head. Take the move brush, and I'm just going to tug those lids back and down a little bit. Now you can also roll around to the back side too, and you see that the back side you can see through the mesh. If I go to the tool menu and I scroll down to the bottom of this list and I go to display properties, I can turn on double-sided. So now I can go into the back of the mesh here, and I can actually start pushing and pulling and sculpting from the inside as well. You see, that's actually really valuable when you're getting into sort of a tight squeeze in the places like the eye here. Like if I want to tug this further back, I can go into the inside of the eye, or the inside of the mesh here, and just pull it from here. But that's actually not what I want to do. I want to bring this forward, so I'm going to bring this forward like this, and then I want to bring these eyelids back a little bit. There we go. There we go. That's what I was looking for. And I'm going to go to my Dam Standard brush, and I just want to create some creases here. Again, don't worry about stressing with too much detail. Just sketch, just loosely, gesturally sketch, because you can always go back and tighten it up later. You just don't want to get stuck focusing on details in one area at the expense of other areas. There we go. And a neat trick here when you're working with eyes, if I go and Alt-click, I'm going to reveal the whole head now by Control-Shift clicking on the background. Now, if I want to Alt-click on those spheres, the eyeballs, I can actually create a corneal bulge on here. I'm going to go to the standard brush. I'm going to change to Alpha 14, which is a circular alpha that has a nice fall off on it. Now, on the brushes so far, I've just turned on Solo, so that hides the other Z tools, the other subtools. Solo just hides the other subtools. So far we've been using alphas with our brushes that just drag along the surface in a line. If I change my stroke type to drag rectangle, now if I click and drag, make sure X symmetry is turned on, we'll turn off Solo, I can drag out a single instance of that alpha. So I can create a really striking sort of corneal bulge on the eye there. And that just helps give the impression that there's a lens on the eye there. It helps sort of communicate gaze. It's kind of neat. So I'm going to take Move Brush. I'm going to go back to the head. I've just Alt-clicked on the head. So that's now my active tool. And I'm just going to continue sort of working into the shapes around the eyes here. I really like the sunken kind of eye socket that we've got going on. So I'm going to accentuate that a bit. Now I think we're about ready to add some tusks here in these sockets that we've been creating. So I want to go ahead and create these sockets. Now there's a couple ways that we can go about doing that. I'm going to create them using a subtool. I'm going to make a different mesh here for the tusks. So we're going to come back to our subtool menu. I'm going to append, and I'm going to append in just the polymesh star. The polymesh star is sort of a generic placeholder mesh. It's a generic polygon mesh that you can replace with other things. So I'm going to go ahead and select the solo button here so all the other subtools disappear. So we just see the polymesh star. So now we're going to switch to move, and that's going to open up the gizmo again. We're going to click the gear icon, and now we can select some of our polymesh primitives. We're going to select the ring 3D. Now the ring 3D has these gizmos here in the center that allow us to edit it. So for example, if I were to click and drag this one, that's going to be the inside diameter. This one out here would be the taper diameter, so I can taper that down, because remember, we're going to make a tusk here. That's the idea. So we want to change the sweep now so it doesn't go into a complete circle, wrapping all the way around to the end point. So as I mouse over any of these, you see there's a little yellow tooltip that tells me what each thing does. So coverage will change the coverage. I've got the twist here, so I can give a twist to the mesh. I have the subdivisions there along the diameter. I can make it a bit less dense. Here I've got the subdivisions along the radius. I can turn that down if I want to make it a smaller horn. And then of course we've got scale here that will scale the end up and down, but I want to keep it pointed. I want to reduce the number of divisions along the length of the horn. There we go. So now I've got a pretty decent horn, but I think we can do a lot more with it. I want to actually give it some definition. I want to give it some twist. I'm actually going to change that sweep again. So let me go back to the sweep here, coverage, and I want to turn that down a bit. There we go. So I'm going to click the gear again, and down here we've got our deformers, and I'm going to select, let's do twist. Now, you see here I've got twist on this side. I've got twist on this side. So I'm trying to give it a real interesting kind of curvature. And we can rotate around this as we're working to get a better idea of the shape that we're going to get. Oops, there we go. Here we go. So now we've got a real nice kind of horn-like sweep. I'm going to press the Customize button again and then switch from Twist here. I'm going to click Accept, and that's going to accept that deformer and apply it. Now I could just leave that deformer live. I didn't have to accept it. But this bakes it down, essentially creates the geometry as we see it now. So if I go back to my subtool menu, we can turn off solo so we see the rest of the mesh now. And I'm in the gizmo, so I can just go ahead and click and drag and move this horn over to the side. Let's go ahead and rotate it. And I'm going to scale it up a bit. And then let's position it. So you see that the gizmo is not actually centered in the object. If I unlock it, I can take it and I can actually move it where I want it to be. So I want all my rotations and everything to happen from this point. So I'll lock it again, and then I'm just going to move it into position. And let's go ahead and go to the top view here, and let's give it a back kind of rotation there. There we go. That's interesting. Cool. Now I'm going to exit out of Move and go back to just Draw mode. Take my Move brush and just do the last little bits of tweaking of this shape. I think I could actually scale this up a bit, so I'm going to go ahead and scale it up here, and then go back to my Move brush and just clean up the ends here where it's too big, just by scooching them inside using the Move brush. I'm going to Alt-click on the head to select that mesh, and then I'm just going to adjust the skin where it's meeting that horn. There we go. And remember how we duplicated before. I'm going to go to Z plugin, mirror, and I'm going to mirror those horns across, like so. Turn on my X symmetry, and let's go ahead and just kind of rotate these. There we go. That's a really neat kind of angle that we get like that. I like that. Now I'm going back to my move brush, and I'm just going to adjust the position of the ears and the sides of the head here, just now in relation to that new bit that we've added on. I think it might be nice just to play around with these shapes. And I'm going to add a subdivision level to these horns, so I've just Alt-clicked on them, so they're now the active subtool. And I'm going to press Control D, and watch what happens to the horns. They smooth out. They get a subdivision level. Now that's different from Dynamesh. We're not Dynameshing these horns. The horns have actual subdivision levels like our original sphere did. You see there's 2 subdivision levels. If I Control D again, there'll be 3. This is not Dynameshing, so dragging a masking marquee does nothing. That's only on the head here. The head doesn't have subdivision levels. It has Dynamesh turned on. So I'm just going to go ahead and do some tinkering with the shapes here, just to make it more interesting. There we go. Go back to my clay tubes brush, and I'm just going to stroke along the sides of the skull here. I do like how it's got a sort of unconventional shape to the sides of the skull. I don't want to make it too human, so I'm avoiding that, but I also don't want it just to become sort of concave or flat on the sides in an uninteresting way. Doing a little bit of wrinkle sculpting here with the Damn Standard brush. Take the move brush, and I just want to bring these up a bit. And let's pull these little points out here. And we're just going to execute Dynamesh just to clean up all those changes that we made. Great, so now would be a good time for us to go ahead and save our work.